joining us today. I'm Pam Drucker Mann, Global Chief Revenue Officer and President of the U.S. Revenue at Condé Nast. Today, I'm really excited to share a new proprietary marketing framework in partnership with Deloitte that outlines a whole new way of thinking around the consumer decision journey. This definitive new framework creates both short and long-term brand viability and centers around cultural relevance as the new metric for success. Most of us have prioritized scale, i.e. share of voice, or engagement, share of wallet, sounds familiar, in response to the dwindling attention economy. But today, we're unveiling a new metric called share of culture. This new research represents a more holistic set of metrics that, when considered together, more effectively drives consumers through the purchase funnel, which is especially important as we look to more effectively prioritize marketing dollars through COVID and into 2021. Joining us today, we have Robert Aitken, Managing Director at Deloitte, and our very own Andea Campbell, Head of Marketing Strategy and Research. All right, let's get into it. This year's been interesting, to say the least. We're all facing a new reality because of COVID, and the new ways we've all changed will certainly last well beyond the pandemic, whenever that ends. But the truth is, this shift didn't happen overnight. We're already seeing growing trends like emerging audiences with new expectations. We're seeing data privacy laws threatening the existence of social media platforms, consumer outcries of social injustice, political dichotomies, and even environmental consciousness. But that was all happening before COVID hit, right? So while COVID did not create the world we're living in, and it also solidified a fundamental shift in the way consumers look at brands today. So what are they looking for? 1, brands that reflect the culture at large. 2, more transparency to establish much needed trust. And 3, quality over quantity. So what's at stake for you? What's at stake for all of us? I don't know, $50 trillion in consumer spending? That's a lot. And because of COVID, every single dollar counts even more, as consumers are even more discerning than they've ever been. So old tactics and playbooks aren't going to cut it this year, or moving forward, quite frankly. Marketers are going to have to think differently and challenge the old model, because there's a new way forward, which prioritizes the whole funnel with a customer-centric approach. Expanding our thinking beyond share of wallet and share of voice into a new metric, as I've said, that includes both of them and still accounts for way more. Why? Well, because looking at a singular metric no longer delivers. If you're not accounting for the entire funnel, then you're missing an opportunity to evaluate everything that drives performance, which is so crucial. And when you do that, it will help you plan more efficiently with greater upside. And who doesn't want that right now? In the end, building a sale is not the same thing as building a brand. But by the way, you can't create sales without building a brand. If you solidify the relationship you have with your consumer, they'll continue to come back over and over again. And by the way, they'll come right now. And that new way forward is cultural relevance. Culture is the fuel for the new commerce engine. It's actually what puts gas in the tank when you are spending on the performance marketing side. So what do we think of when we hear the word culture, right? Brands who are innovators, that might sound familiar, risk takers maybe, brands who stand for something, brands who create an emotional connection with consumers. And culture has always mattered, but it especially means everything to your bottom line today. And we can prove it. It means acquiring new emerging audiences. It means driving immediate sales. And it also means guaranteed brand success. So if you are like in this mode where you're thinking about wanting to drive performance, you have to make sure that your brand matters. And this is how you do it. Through a new metric we're calling share of culture. This is a multi-pronged, holistic approach to win with your customer. That will also perform for your bottom line. So what does that mean, and how did we get here? Well, we're lucky today to have Deloitte joining us to provide a background on the study and methodology. Rob, I'm gonna hand it over to you now.
Great, thanks, Pam. Yeah, as Pam mentioned, Deloitte Consulting recently collaborated with Condé Nast on a study to understand the value of branding and more importantly, how do you measure it? Where we have shifted to this data-driven world, and with that, there's this hyper focus on performance marketing or these lower funnel tactics. And so what we wanted to do is understand, how are brands still valuing brand tactics? and what are some ways to measure it? So what we did is we did a survey of over 100 marketers, a few dozen interviews with senior executives, and then secondary research across consumer, publisher, and brand segments to understand how branding is valued today and what are some approaches to measure it. So what we heard by over 90% of the people that we interviewed is the funnel is still intact and that branding is critical for an organization's long-term viability. And many continued that they would say that focusing solely on performance is a pretty myopic approach to marketing, and sales will go to zero as soon as you turn off those performance campaigns. And so they suggested that looking at the bottom of the funnel as, yes, a way to drive sales, but as Pam was just mentioning, that brand really drives the efficacy of those lower funnel tactics. So when we asked lifestyle, retail, and other category owners how they were thinking about building successful branding campaigns, they suggested some ways in which we can come up with a new metric and think about this. So, and they closed with that, that it's really critical that brands that succeed here understand that cultural relevance is the key to unlocking greater customer potential today or tomorrow. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Andea, and she's going to walk you through the Share of Culture framework. Andea?
Thank you, Rob. Given the unforeseen pandemic, we executed a second study with decision analysts just after Memorial Day, when the US was moving into a pivotal moment culturally. In this study, we shifted our attention to the consumer. We wanted to know which companies resonated with them as it pertained to those factors that drive culture, the most sought after metrics by marketers. We asked consumers to rate select brands across streaming, platform, and media companies on the core tenets of Share of Culture and its framework, which includes trust, content quality, leadership, the degree to which a brand sets the standard for its industry, influence, and engagement, or how well a brand captures attention. 50% of the sample included 16 to 34-year-olds, and Likert scales were used to measure the 5 metrics that make up Share of Culture with an additional 50 attributes that were measured across those areas to help them better understand what is driving their success. We measured 70 brands across streaming services, platforms, and content creators. So now that we've seen the list, let's take a look at how they did. Here we see that streamers, led by Disney Plus and Netflix, have the highest Share of Culture score, and that content creators and platforms rank closely to each other. But streaming companies don't present many opportunities for brand messaging. So for the purpose of this presentation, we are going to focus on where marketers can actually partner with platforms and content creators. How do you literally own a Share of Culture? Well, you need partners to boost your culture rating so that you can quickly connect consumers at the bottom of the funnel. And emergent audiences are all about customer acquisition, but without Share of Culture, good luck getting them to pay attention to your brand. So owning Share of Culture is really about picking the right partner and attracting the right audience. By establishing your brand as a cultural icon, you can guarantee results. Let's begin with how to build meaningful partnerships. First up is content creators. Due to the wide swath of brands that were measured, we bucketed them into 4 endemic categories representing consumer ratings across each of these areas. Starting with the fashion category, consumers see this group of content brands as responsible for creating trends that are culturally relevant. And Condé Nast brands like Vogue and GQ are leaders in being a cultural icon and making things popular. In the lifestyle category, we see that there are different strengths for this set of brands, such as creating new passion points through trusted content. Brands that rank highly on leading with quality and discovery are Architectural Digest, Bon Appetit, and Condé Nast Traveler. Moving on, the thought leadership category. Here it is no surprise to see that the cultural collateral for this group of brands rests in meaningful and influential content. The New Yorker and ours top the list as brands that are authoritative authors of impactful stories. Our last bucket is featured voices, and this is perhaps one of the most differentiated groupings based on how they own Share of Culture. Here we see things like pushing boundaries, purpose-driven narratives, and inclusion ranking highly on key attributes for the category. Them and Teen Vogue rank the highest across all of these. So looking across all of these categories, it's clear that these brands all hold a different meaning and value for consumers. But are they all working equally hard? As the data shows, Condé Nast brands rank highest on the culture spectrum, with consumer ratings that put them well ahead of all other competitive media brands. But we have yet to consider platforms, so let's take a look at how they're doing. We start here by looking at the highest ranking platforms that are important to consumers and advertisers alike. Here we can see that consumers give Google credit for what it does best, expanding knowledge through search. On the other hand, YouTube and Instagram strengths lean more into areas like connecting people and creating trends. Not unexpected given the predominantly user-generated nature of their content. You could advertise here on your own, but you'd be missing a differentiated and valuable component of share of culture. While Google is good at curation, when it comes to trust and engagement, Condé Nast brands rank the highest. Similarly, in the video world, there is no dispute that YouTube brings users together, but in terms of content quality and prestige, Condé Nast brands are the ones that clearly outpace YouTube. Lastly, even though Instagram is credited with making things trendy, it is actually core brands within the Condé Nast portfolio that take the #1 spot in introducing consumers to the brands they ultimately buy. But let's go a bit deeper on platforms and share of culture. Well, when you add Condé Nast to this spectrum, you can see that it ranks above average with an overall share of culture score that puts it in the same position as YouTube. Now, we know younger consumers spend a disproportionate amount of time across social media platforms in particular. I think of my stepson, case in point. So let's take a look at what emerging audiences think about these brands' cultural relevance. First, let's set the stage. Why do you have to care about emerging audiences at all? Well, it's no new news that Gen Z is hot right now, and for real reason. They make up a large portion of the US population, and they influence household purchases in a very real way. In today's world, you cannot afford to ignore emerging audiences. Not only are they early adopters and trendsetters for subsequent generations, they're also driving culture in an unprecedented way. Show me how your brand's values align with Gen Z, and I can tell you how successful you will be in the future. In this study, we took a look at which brands reign supreme with emerging audiences across the 5 share of culture metrics. And an overwhelming number of Condé Nast brands end up ranking highest among 16 to 34-year-olds. And here's how these audiences rank social platforms against culture. Notice that the overall platform average has dropped nearly 6 points, indicating younger audiences already have a dimmer view of platforms as it pertains to share of culture. And for a brand that attracts so many young people, it doesn't seem TikTok is particularly valued as a cultural champion. When it comes to attracting those elusive 16 to 34-year-old customers, no platform does it better than Condé Nast. So we've covered a lot. But how should you be thinking about all of this? Next, we'll break down the winning formula that undeniably proves performance. When it comes to social media platforms, we can easily see why they are attractive to advertisers. They do, in fact, have respectable scale. And while TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook are all below the overall share of culture average, their scale is impressive. When we map Condé Nast on this graph, we see its share of culture score, as well as its scale, puts it neatly between TikTok and Instagram. However, this is only Condé Nast as represented by our print and digital audiences. To make that analogous to the other platforms, let's see what happens when we add Condé Nast social following. And with that, you have a winning combination. Condé Nast scale and reach surpasses even YouTube with an above average share of culture score that leads the content creator category. When it comes to picking the right partner who engages the right audience with enough scale and cultural relevance to matter, Condé Nast is the most strategic choice. But don't take our word for it. We've seen a 32% lift for people who saw custom Condé Nast video in the fashion category. We've generated over $1 million in incremental sales for a new sun care line that partnered across Allure, Vanity Fair, Glamour, and GQ. And we've delivered 12-to-1 return on ad spend in a partnership with Architectural Digest and Self for a new mattress line. And this is just a small sample of Condé Nast performance. Performance speaks for itself, but you can't get there without culturally relevant brands. And of course, we'd be remiss not to tell you how to activate share of culture with a product suite that takes the best of Condé Nast share of culture and puts it to work for your brand. In conclusion, culture is not something that's easily obtained, but you need it to fuel your bottom line, so start prioritizing investments around it. Emerging audiences are notoriously difficult to capture, but you need them for the future of your brand, so make sure that you're connecting with them. And lastly, the only way to own share of culture is to choose a partner that knows how to activate it in a meaningful way.
Thanks, Andea. Thanks, Rob. It's important to kind of call out, as we talked about what it means as a partner to, establish share of culture, as a new metric and to drive performance for your brands. Clearly, we started the presentation talking about, streamers and some of the streaming services that actually performed really well, partners like Google, partners like Netflix. And I just wanted to call out that, number one, These guys happen to be, pretty substantial partners of Condé Nast. They recognize how important culture is. So this has been a big part of their strategy from the very beginning. So that's one. Two, we did talk a lot about Condé Nast brands and how they've popped amongst other, important partners like the New York Times. And so, I think it's important to recognize that this was actually a blind study. And I think it's something that's important, which is why we brought Deloitte in. So this was not, a way in which we were asking consumers to specifically call out Condé Nast brands. However, since we're on the topic of Condé Nast, I would be remiss to not help you all think about ways you can now activate against this. And you heard Andea say, partnerships and through emerging audiences, both of which we can bring to the table. And some of those ways you can activate today is through a new product that we just launched this year called E-commerce Accelerator. And that's when you take, the amazing content that we create from brands like Vogue and GQ and Vanity Fair, and add commerce to it. And that's where you can see that amazing one-to-one, influence to sale happen. Two, we've got other great products like Prime Shoppable, which is a way that you can buy our content, buy affiliate content on the inside of our video, in addition to how you can buy our influence in social, whether that's on Instagram or Facebook through our Amplify product. And then finally, a new data segment that we launched, which is the Now Next Customer, is a way that you can immediately connect with that consumer who's so leaned in with our brands today to try to, move them through that funnel faster. And in close, I just want to address a couple things, readdress a couple things. One is culture is the new commerce engine. So if you're thinking about, oh, okay, e-commerce has now got to be part of our strategy, which I'm sure you're thinking, especially in a moment like COVID, culture is going to be the gas in the car, if you will, as you heard us talking about earlier. Second, emerging audiences are going to lead the way. They want different ways to connect. They have to believe in the brand that they're buying into. And that's not a long-term strategy. That's not like an upstream focus. That's exactly what's driving e-commerce right this minute. And then third, you have to choose a partner that performs. Not all brands can be cultural icons, but you can certainly partner with brands that are, and it's just going to help you work so much smarter from a marketer's perspective than harder. So thanks again. Thanks to Rob. Thanks to Andea. And then thanks to AgWeek for having us.